Today I will try to address the topic of futurity island in relation to the swamp, philosophically, but also in relation to the question of the imaginary and imagination, which is basically the field where I'm moving in, and the main problem which I'm really focusing on and wrote a few books on that. Is the question of the imaginary, and particularly the radical imaginary as it was proposed by French Greek philosopher Cornelius Castoriadis, but not only. So, why an island? You know, what has an island to do with the future? And also, how can we think of an island in the light of the swamp? Swamps and islands. Basically, when we start thinking of islands, the utopian regime, the perspective of utopia becomes really important. So, I will be showing some images here. Some of them are really relevant, some are more of associations, so sometimes I will comment on them, but sometimes you just have an aesthetic take on it. So basically, when we think of the interrelation between island and future, we come across with the utopian regime. And in the utopian regime, future, the moment of future is basically transformed into a representable topography. So the place is represented, and it can be represented. Moreover, future is a place. Not a time phase, but rather a place. You know, when you want to speak of the future in terms of utopia, you need to construct a place. And it is characterized, first of all, through distanciation. It is a distant place, you need to go somewhere to reach it. And also it is separated. It is a certain model, a certain territory which can be circumcised, even, you know, which can be really located. So basically, that's why water comes into play as a mean of separation which fills the void, the emptiness. And in this context, utopias and islands have been really related for a while. We have Tom Moore's utopias case. You know, Tom Moore introduced the concept of utopia, although different kind of islands have been functioning in a utopian regime, like Atlantis by Plato. Although it's not really a utopia, but still, when you want to have a model of a future place, basically utopia is very helpful because first of all, it's being separated, as in famous decision by King Eutychus, who transformed basically peninsula into an island, you know, according to the description of Tom Moore. And in this case, the geography of utopia becomes really conceivable at a glance. It's almost an architectural model. You know, we can conceive the structure of the city, also corresponding to the structure of society. An island is a helpful tool to think, because, you know, it performs an imaginary gesture, you know, of locating something in your fantasy projection in front of you and having clear distinction. It is as if you have to conceive an architecture through the model. You know? That's why architects are so into models, because you need to locate it in front of you and to have a look around. You know? So it's manipulatable, transformable, and also separated, you know, distanced, almost as if it was performed in a mental space. Okay, so basically, Gilles Deleuze, who wrote a beautiful text on desert islands. He was thinking of islands as a product of imagination, as he puts it in this text. He came with this irony towards Britain, that that England is populated will always come as a surprise. He's French. Humans can live on an island only by forgetting what an island represents. Islands are either from before or for after humankind. So basically, he meant the imaginary nature of every island, desert island, Basically, desert islands are the dreams, the fantasies of humans to project something that is better than our environment, or to project some new beginning, as he puts it, to think of an escape towards some better places in order to recreate yourself. At the core of the thinking of an island, we have this escapist dream, the dream of escape. There are a lot of famous cases in modern art. Paul Gauguin is one of them, who painted a lot of paintings about Tahiti. You know that better than me. Tahiti works for Gauguin as some place, as a forgotten paradise, or as a distant place, as a separated place from Western mentality, where almost all the mythology happens and coexist together with Western civilization, but not technically. So, if we could continue along the lines of Gilles Deleuze, so we say that dreaming of islands, I quote, whether with joy or in fear, it doesn't matter, is dreaming of pulling away, of being already separate, far from any continent, of being lost and alone, or it is dreaming of starting from scratch, recreating, beginning anew. So that's what an island represents, and I think it has a lot to do with an architecture as well. This islandic thinking of an island as some place that you can separate, distanciate yourself, and project, brings you a certain type of the imaginary which is being exercised here. And also in relation to this, we might think of a tradition of different theories which criticized the imaginary. The imaginary as something which induces us into the false consciousness, according to ideas of Marxist tradition, formulated in Engels' thought, but also picked up by many others. False consciousness, falsches Bewusstsein, is something that points both to an illusionary nature of imaginary, but also an ideological part of it. Ideology which basically transforms the reality by presenting false illusions for transcendent goals. So the similar gesture is found in psychoanalytic analysis, in Lacan or Zizek nowadays. They criticize the imaginary fantasy for this principle of dissociation, where basically imaginary stands at the part of reality, where you find the imaginary element as seductive element which basically changes your reality in order to tell you the biggest lie about yourself, about your narcissistic ego, or about ideology. So this is, I would say, this element, the figure of an island, is a vehicle for ideology to present a certain type of the imaginary. Also, one more thing that could be noticed, one more feature that could be noted in relation to the imaginary is the dromology, dromological take. Dromology, dromoscopy, and many other drama things were proposed by Paul Virillo, a French philosopher and media theorist, who thought of the technology in terms of a speed. For him, basically, every technology is a modulation of speed. This is a piece by Jiria Cha, which is who is an artist working on media art and different kind of similar projects, and he tried to represent the timeline of different activities on the web. How different timelines do function in different continents and fields of Earth. So there are coexistent temporalities represented through these activities of light. So basically, for the utopia, the utopian imaginary, the modulation of rhythm, the acceleration of rhythm is really important. Namely because we have a certain distance. That distance produces an acceleration. We need to seek for it. We need to rush in order to approach a certain island, an imaginary island, and basically we can never reach it, but we need to do it fast and faster. So that's element of the progress, which is really important here. And we are always lost in this race. There is this famous line in Sopranos series. Do you know Sopranos? So Soprano Jr. once said, some people are so behind in the race that they even think that they're leading. So I think that's really the case in dromological enslavement of utopia. You're always so behind the race, it moves so much faster that you can never reach it. So the imaginary of an island can be encapsulated in these 5 points, which I tried to present to you here. The projection of future as the only possibility, the possibility, or the future, where there is one line of time and it is governed by one goal. It has a certain teleology in its structure. Hegelian, if you want, but not only. The second point is the separation and distanciation, or the transcendence. Basically, as we saw in the description by Deleuze, you need to separate and distanciate in order to reach it, and you will never be successful in that. Also, the moment of ideology introduced by false consciousness, and through that moment, the control of present reality is performed, because basically, since you always need to go further towards that better future place. And the last part is acceleration. So what has the swamp to do with all that? And I think living in swamps was always a difficult task for humans. Basically, swamps have been really neglected or downplayed, as Gediminas put it nicely, noting the uncanny nature of the swamp. So basically, we can have a lot of mythological elements, or even everyday cases where swamp is considered as something nightmarish, or really something disgusting, something to be dealt with as a problem. And if we think about humans living in swamps, there are only 2 possibilities. Islands are always have always been distant and attractive, Well, you know, nobody wants to escape for a romantic weekend to the swamp, basically. You know? So, in this case, you know, we think of an undetermined threat, of certain, you know, features which cannot be handled. So it is better to neglect or to destroy or to reclaim the swamp, to transform it into something solid, comprehensible. You know, there was this need of comprehension of the swamp in order to downplay its indeterminacy. So if humans wish to settle down in a wetland, there are only two options: either land reclamation, you know, or basically to turn it into an island, which is precisely the case of Venice. You know, you have to turn the swamp into an island in order to be able to live in it. It is very interesting that this phantasmatic potential of Venice was linked by Mark Schell in his beautiful book on islandology with the utopian regime. You know, as is well known, Venice was born when people from mainland immigrated into the lagoon and joined the settlers of local wetlands. So in this case, the production of island was conceived not only through an architectural distribution of space, a newly organized balance between earth and water, but also by, as he says, activating its phantasmatic potential. And Mark Schell linked this passage of becoming an island out of the swamp with the utopian procedure described in Thomas More's book. The floating city emerged from wetlands through an imaginary institution of socioeconomic power which guaranteed the benefit of living, I quote, in the midst of great laguna, much as did the utopians, end of quote. And Schell notes that formation of land charged them with the capacity of domination over nothingness, basically, creatio ex nihilo. And by producing imaginary significations, and this is my idea, bringing the lines of Cornelius Castoriadis together with Schell, and the clear understanding that the true power lies in the full perception of unreal foundation of reality. I'm quoting Schell again. What made the Venetians powerful in historical context was not that they had found, namely, a swampland in a laguna. Rather, it was their common wrestling of land from water and of residing in a waterland, literally its land. You know, like both its meaning water and land in land. Their swampland experience gave them recompensatory edge. Like the canal city of Amsterdam in their lowlands, Venice developed a commercial empire from nothing by creating land where they had been none, the dikes, and wealth of which no one had dreamt, credit money. Out of the laguna of real estate and unreal money, they made a new republican commercial dominion. So basically, sorry. What Mark Schell wants to point out is that this experience of creating this island out of swamp allowed Venetians to realize the radical approach toward the imaginary nature of reality. You know, you need to manipulate through a real strator of reality, like credit money, in order to be powerful. But true power lies in the radical imagination. We might put it this way here. So I would say that in in response to those points, I try to make listing the imaginary of island. I would try to propose 5 features, 5 thoughts. five points, which are basically better mic. This one is not functioning.
There is a problem in the sound. Keep it close.
Yeah. Okay. I'll try to keep it close.
No, it's not working.
Not
Maybe
working.
maybe try the other one.
Well, maybe this one.
And you switch
This
off
one?
this
Is it better? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so you remember I was pointing those features of a natural island. So the first one was the projection of future as the unique and one possibility, you know. So I would say that in the imaginary of the swamp, we might speak of the futurities instead of the future, of different futures, of futurabilities, as some other authors put it, but we'll come to that. We had separation and distanciation, so in response to that, I would say we can think of hybridity and in-betweenness being in the gray zone, because when we speak of the swamp, we can never set a clear boundary between water and land. You know, it's always both, so the problem of separation is always at stake here. The false consciousness, you know, or the regime of ideology can be opposed with accepting of indeterminacy, which is basically the problematics of radical imaginary proposed by Cornelius Castoriadis, which will be exposed later. The egocentric or anthropocentric vision of your needs and purposes might be responded with a vision of some poetic nature, of making together, and the acceleration with the acceleration. Yeah. Okay. The first point regards the futurities and futurabilities. I think there were a lot of discussions on that point, and Franco Bifo Berardi, who wrote a book recently, was chosen by me to be quoted here. You might know him, he is a famous Italian philosopher. Although I have a lot of problems with his take on many things, and I don't agree with him usually, but he is an important thinker. So he proposes the idea of futurability, or where he says that futurability is a layer of possibility that may or may not develop into actuality. So basically, we can think of different futurities or futurabilities in relation to the field of possibility, and thank you, and to have them all in perspective in order to test and also to criticize one version of future. Instead of one version of future, which is really a utopistic take on the time, we might think of bifurcation of time, which is always, Deleuzian problematic and Bergsonian. Deleuze thought of the nature of time in relation to the virtual, which is basically the field where undeterminacy of time comes into play. So we might think of futurability as the plentiness, the multitude of futures upcoming to us. That offers different ways, but neither of them is correct. So I think this is exactly the swampian take on the future. Swamp is not one future. Swamp is futures. So different futurabilities. And in this case, I really like to propose a quote by Catherine Malabou, who's been invited to the Swamp School. And he's been a dear friend of ours, and she's been present in the discussions and in with her ideas. So Venice, her concept proposed in the book on Hegel, where her famous idea of plasticity was developed, is a way to think of the future combining both our projections and undeterminacy of what is unexpected. So I quote her. Voir venir in French means to wait while, as is prudent, observing how events are developing. But it also suggests that other people's intentions and plans must be probed and guessed. And I would add here, not only people's, but species and world powers, swamps, you know? So what is the plan of the swamp? This is the scope of swamp school to understand. You know, what is the swamp planning? It is an expression that can thus refer to one and the same time to the state of being sure of what is coming and of not knowing what is coming. You know? So undeterminacy is always at stake here. It is on this account that voir venir, to see what is coming, can represent that interplay within Hegelian philosophy of teleological necessity and surprise. So basically, Hegel is famous for his teleology, but also, according to plastic reading by Malabou, there is an element of necessity and surprise, of combination of necessity and surprise. Sorry. Okay, so that concerns the first point, the futurability or futurity. The second point, the in-betweenness, I would say, you know, is really philosophically present in the nature of the swamp. The conditions of possibility of the swamp, to put it in the Kantian way, you know, depend on staying in betweenness. It is never a clear land or clear water. You know? We always speak of the swamp as something really difficultly understandable in terms of entity. Swamp is no entity, you know. Swamp is no territory. It can be, it can spread out both vertically and horizontally. You know? So basically, you can never understand the swamp out of the distant look, because, and also digging deeper, you always collide with difficulties of embracing the totality of the swamp. So it is always in between. So it's not neither an island, nor a continent, nor an ocean. Moreover, many of islands meet, propose the meeting place between earth and water through the swamp. You know, there are swampy shores of islands where waters and water and earth collide, basically. So the instantaneous challenge to its imaginary lies in the fact that all types of wetlands escape this logic of separation, the very first movement of imagination which creates an island, as we read in Deleuze. Okay. Then the third point, which regards basically the radical imagination, is related to the ideas of Cornelius Castoriadis, which I wanted to present with a more detailed approach here. Castoriadis conceived the idea of radical imagination basically as a generative power which precedes every reality. You know, we basically, if you want to understand radical imaginary, you need to think of the creative nature of every reality we address to, and this creative nature means that we create reality, we intrude into reality by creating it, or we forget that we did that. So basically, if we get back to the radical imaginary, we become aware of our constructive nature. you know, towards the reality. We are constructors of reality. But in order to understand the radical imaginary in terms of relation with reality, he also had to establish the idea of magma, a certain forgotten shadow of every individual representation. What is magma? For Castoriadis, you know, there is a beautiful text, The Logic of Magmas, in the book. Castoriadis reader, you can try it, you can find it and try it reading. But I would say that in discussing the logic of magma, among other things, Castoriadis provided a beautiful quote by a quantum physicist, which is Miara Mugur-Schechter. I think she's of Romanian, maybe German origin, who reflected on the manner which scientists, on the manner in which scientists have to deal with the undetermined strata of quantum reality. She followed, the quantum physicist's writings and tried to understand how, all these problems of quantum physics are solved in the representation of scientific thinking. According to her, in this process, there is a need of syntactical organization. We always need to have representations, to put it, simply. We need to have syntaxes of words, images, and basically structures. We need to structure the reality. However, it is very important, to have a syntactical organization in order to create the conditions under which the thought circulates on well-laid and reinforced pathways, and that was a quote. But beyond that, one sinks into a genuine semantic mud. And I think this is a beautiful, witness of scientific take on reality, pointing at a certain level of reality which is not representable. Basically, according to Castoriadis, the semantic mud is just another name, interchangeable with the humus or the limon for magma of physical being. So there is a layer of reality which is just mud, which is just the swamp, which is not conceivable unless you transform it into something syntactical, into something representable. And this is a constant dialectics of radical imagination. You address the indeterminacy, you approach it, and you give names and meanings, you structure it, but it's a transformation of reality already. So you offer a transformation of reality in order to understand it. This is the quote by Castoriadis. It is this limon, the radical imagery, that engenders the schemata that permit the physicist to proceed further precisely in the ensemblization of physical being, which moreover lends itself indefinitely to this ensemblization, and not just anyhow, as the entire history of physics shows. Furthermore, starting from these formulations, the determinist thesis can be illustrated once again. The mud, the magma, is provisional. It is illusion or residue due to the state of our ignorance. Tomorrow, it will be completely dried up, almost as a swamp, as you see. So basically, the magma's destiny is always to be dried up in order to be comprehended. And that's what the radical imaginary does. Gets back to the magmatic structures, which are not structures, which are basically undetermined layers of reality, structures them and produces the meaning. But also, according to Castoriadis, you are truly aware of the radicality of the imaginary when you understand that in this procedure there is an ontological ambiguity. It is present and not present at the same time. In this creatio ex nihilo, as he puts it, basically you have the tool of operation towards reality. At the same time, you need to keep the negativity in the perspective. So you deal with the things that are both existent and not existent. For example, like mathematical science, I suppose, a formula. Those formula were invented in order to represent reality, but they are just imaginary signs. You know? They do not correspond to the reality. So basically, the true autonomy is the awareness of the illusionary nature of the signs and images that you are using. Okay. So that was the third point. The fourth one regards the swamp as a milieu. Do I still have time, yeah? I think so. I'm approaching to the end. Swamp is a symbiotic milieu by its nature, where a constant individuation takes place, you know, and I'm referring here to basically to Gilbert Simondon, who talked about individuation rather than individuals. What is it? Individuation is a constant process of shaping the individual features of being in becoming, but this being in becoming, according to Simondon, is subjected to the environment, to the interplay with environment. So there are no individuals, there are milieus, environments, where ontogenetic processes are performed. So basically there are no individuals who are being transformed. There is a milieu of transformation where all the interaction takes place. So milieu comes first, you know, environment comes first, the individual. And if you basically dismantle the milieu, you know, the whole ontology collapses. So you cannot think of the ontology of this kind, of swampy milieu, without destroying the swamp. That's why we have the community of plants here. Maybe you noticed, you know, they are all interdependent among each other. You know? Basically, they are the milieu to each other. There is this moment of mediation or transduction, as he puts it. You know, he's also the thinker of media. There is an ontological mediation among them, which keeps them alive. So swamp is this symbiotic milieu which co-creates you know, the elements of the swamp, and where the constant individuation takes place. It is a hybrid place by its definition, because we cannot set clear boundaries. You know? So all the boundaries are relative, you know, and really subjective. It is an opposite to a geometrical space of an utopian island, which can be disassembled to its constituent. You know, it's impossible to disassemble and then to put together the swamp. That fragmentation, the removal of one element, runs the risk of disbalancing of the whole system. So all types of wetlands exist as a constant surplus production by the means of mediation among them. The last point is the acceleration. I think the temporality of the swamp is really important here as well. You know, basically, swamp is famous for having this non-human temporality. Wetlands, and especially peat bogs, are very important in nature for providing a slow-moving waters or even water regimes. In biology, we have this term of water regime related to the swamp. What is water regime? It's basically a way of containing water or slowing down the movement of water through, you know, because the peat basically absorbs water and works as a deaccelerator of the motion. So in this light of the precarious threats, wetlands can even be conceived as a technology of controlling floods, you know. So the temporality of the swamp is a way to even to solve ecological crisis. And its role is parallel with the function of the giant shallow balls, which absorb waters and make them lose their velocity. And also wetland vegetation helps to slow down passage of water too. And I think in this case, the first chapter of the swamp school was really interesting because it was dedicated to the ideas of the sound experience, but also of the rhythm experience. And in many cases, the ideas by Henri Lefebvre were brought in, who thought of rhythm analysis and of a certain dynamics of listening, which changes the perception and the constellation of the listener. And I even think that this has to do with a longer tradition by Gaston Bachelard and Pinheiro dos Santos, who is a very little-known Brazilian thinker, who introduced this element of rhythm analysis as a position to psychoanalysis. And to them, rhythm analysis was a perceptual approach to understand the surroundings by reading the constellation of rhythms. So all the reality can be thought of temporally. Every tool, every object, every milieu is a concentration of different rhythms. And imagination is nothing else than a way of embracing those different rhythmicalities. And I think, you know, through acceleration, through the moment of de-acceleration, which is really well thought of in Bachelard's philosophy, he says a lot of things about how different elements like fire, water, earth have different rhythms. So I would say we can think of swampian rhythms that propose different ways of imagining them temporally. Okay. And, you know, to sum it up, I would say that basically, if a utopian fantasy produces the unity of Ireland by transforming the contradictions into the image of representation, the imagination of the swamp always operates at the limit of the possible or even within the realm of impossible. You know? We have to admit that there is an element of incommensurability to understand the swamp. We cannot represent the swamp. We cannot imagine the swamp as an island or as a model, you know. But we can have different possibilities, different future abilities to test the swamp and to learn from them. That's why we're in the swamp school. So the radical role of imagination allows us to stay in the proximity of magma and to address its magmatic indeterminacy, to use again the term of by Castoriadis, not only by transforming it into the fields of represented possibilities, but also to cultivate the negative power of incompatibility. You know, we have to be aware of creating ex nihilo all the time, of producing a certain fiction which is not a representation, but rather, you know, a transitional object, a way that produces a detour to the swamp, but still it thematizes the swamp, you know, with the complete comprehension that what is also what is not, you know. So this is the radical imagination. We understand and become and remain autonomous of ideological belief that we can represent something here. The full comprehension of magnetic power lies in relinquishing the temptation to manipulate the imaginary projections that require anthropomorphic responsivity based on our needs and conveniences. So we don't think that the swamp can, you know, adapt to our needs. That the swamp can correspond to something human. Basically, we need to try to find new syntactical ways to try to understand what the swamp proposes to us. What are the plans of the swamp. So there is no need to run away from the swamp or to the swamp. The swamps are to be discovered and embraced at home. I think this is a beautiful example where the swamp brought into the pavilion also corresponds to the plants, the ficus tree, and other elements that have been present here, you know, as living species, as living powers of local home. This spatializing topography is not based anymore on procedures of exclusion and distillation, but rather on inclusion and immersion that occur through a constant intensification of the heterotopian potential of the swamp. So if we want to think of topography of the swamp, I would rather propose to remember Michel's Foucault term of heterotopia, you know, the place which is by our side, the place where we exist and where we live, but which has an uncanny element, an element which is not really relevant to our means of understanding. Basically, everything is a swamp, in this case, philosophically, which has a heterotopian potential. You know, we need to discover the swampy elements inside us. It is not how we enter the swamp as a conqueror or as the one who wants to settle down into the swamp. It is how we allow the swamp to enter us. So, this is the imaginary challenge of the swamp. In order to discover the novelty of the futures, we need to become plastic, to be ready to be affected, to find ourselves in the milieu of potentialities that are offered rather than generated, starting from the engagement with the non-human temporalities. The swamp is the future ability as long as we're ready to be transformed by the swamp. Thank you very much.
Interesting for me. When you started from Iceland, you know that utopia as an Iceland, and you mentioned Thomas Moras. I checked Tommaso Campanella as well about the city of Sand. It was in Iceland as well, Toprobona. In the course of my journey, I came to Toprobona. Toprobona is old name and nickname of Sri Lanka. And what I found in the book of Tommaso Campanella, compare with Thomas Moras, both of them didn't mention natives. But in the case of Thomas Moras, we couldn't just to speak about natives because the place of utopia is not quite clear. In the case of Tommaso Campanella, it's completely clear, the place. And in this sense, it's every time was interesting why Campanella didn't mention any natives, no Sri Lankans. And I started to think in the parallel of yours about native, utopia, native, some kind, native. It means that if this one place don't have no past, no maybe future, these people as well don't have any past, or probably the only future of some kind, and they are not colonizers as well. They are not native and they are not colonizers. It is very strange. I very agree about your de-acceleration of Sven. It's very nice. What I would like to discuss with you, first of all, about your interpretation of magma. Okay, because you know, Cornelius Castoriadis wrote in the parallel as well to Georges Bataille, and both of them considered magma as a volcanic, first of all. It's the product of volcan, something from mountains, okay, just explosion in the parallel of sun, semantic and poetics of sun, and energy, and swamp ordinary is presented as something opposite to sun, fire, or mountains, something completely opposite. And in this sense, for me, it was not clear what does mean magma in the sense of swamp. Then, second, you discussed a lot about creatio ex nihilo. But you know, ordinarily in Christian poetics, swamp is considered something different from creatio ex nihilo, as a place where you could not rest, in peace, because this is place of horror, fear, and where there is some tombs and cemeteries, and these spirits who are in cemeteries under the water couldn't rest in peace. They're always in fear, but it's not hell. It's something different. It's before hell. It's hell for our bones, if you would like, not for the spirit. It's hell for bones, and water of these cemeteries in swamps are considered as a poison. You know, it's not simple. And this poetics little bit differs from your interpretation of ex nihilo and magma. How do you choose your poetics for your presentation?
Thank you very much, Gintas. I really agree that it would be interesting to bring in also the indigenous element of this, and we've been doing some efforts beforehand with curators, and also there is this indigenous element for what's the name of that?
Yeah, it's, well, I didn't mention, I just only mentioned one element. There are several elements in the space, and this acoustic tipi is the ongoing project by indigenous artist who is also a researcher at MIT, an engineer, who is also representative of Sasaton, Bapaton, or Yate nation that is part of Dakota. So it is a tribe part of the Dakota nation. Only 12,000 people are in Sasaton, Bapaton, or Yate. So also another quite known representative, Kim Tolbier, indigenous scholar based in Canada. And an engineer, she will come. I mean, like this acoustic tipi was stuck in the Italian customs for a week. They were interrogating it. So it arrived with a delay for the Swamp Radio chapter. It could not be launched, and now it is waiting for Erin to come back in September to activate it.
Yeah, so and I think what indigeneity stands for here is a way of criticizing the modernity, you know, along the lines of Bruno Latour, if you want, you know, when you think of indigeneity, which has never been reduced to certain modernity. So basically, we all are indigenous on a certain level, as we are hybrids. So I think your take on this by how did you put it? Those nations. You natives, yeah. So you natives, I think they are hybrids.
Yes.
And they're hybrids. So that's why I think they really into relation with Swampian thinking. But going back to Castoriadis, I completely agree that is not a traditional reading. And Castoriadis himself was not too much interested in swamps. This is me, you know, bringing Castoriadis in the parallel with the Swampian, you know, with the Swampian challenge, I would say. And also the poetics of the swamps are really, I would say, they're really partial. You know, what we're trying to do here in this project is to have this hybridity, you know, of different things, also technological, but scientific, biological, okay, which gives us new ways to formulate new poetics. So basically, my poetics is like, you know, being born here. It's not that I'm inheriting activating some existing poetics. And I think, the productions of artists are really important in this case, because they are producing some poetic elements. So basically it's not the traditional retroactive swampian poetics, but really reconsideration of the swamp in the light of new challenges. But what else? I have many problems with Castoriadis as well. I just didn't want to make it a philosophical talk, pointing out, the things that I agree and disagree, and this is not a philosophy conference. But I think Castoriadis is stuck with the concept of a social, which is not really a hybrid concept. For him, he's still in this modernity timeline. He's a bit being a post-Marxist, anti-Marxist, whatever. I think for him, every reality is a social reality, which for me is a problem, because I think we need to try to formulate another radicality of radical imagination, another creatio ex nihilo in the light of posthuman term. So it is a next step. So my interpretation is plastic, if you want, using the word by Malabou, and not diligent to the traditional scholars of Castoriadis. But that's, I'm not avoiding that. I'm fully accepting this, and even trying to criticize it in my further writings. I had this discussion with Castoriadis, which will be somehow exposed later on. So I agree with you that there is this different, but if you take different poetics from, for example, indigenous Amazonian tribes related to swamps, and maybe Baltic, maybe European, maybe Asian elements, we have competing poetics of the swamps. So I don't think there is one poetics of the swamps in this case. Okay. Yes, please.
Just a comment and a suggestion.
Yes.
When you mentioned the mud and scientific knowledge and the Castoriadis quotation, and there, probably you know that also Karl Popper make this metaphor of scientific knowledge and scientific knowledge like a house built on paraffin, in the sense that knowledge is not based on a solid rock bottom ground, but nevertheless, even if it's based on the mood, can be good knowledge, well-grounded knowledge. But this interesting, this idea that the knowledge is like paraffin based on the mood, and developing this metaphor, we can notice that yes, all the houses in Venice are built on wood parapets. But what happens when the wood stays under the water for a long time? It becomes harder than iron. So this just indicates. I think this is a good metaphor not to explain what Popper said. That you don't need to have a solid rock bottom ground to have useful and well-grounded knowledge. But even the mud can be, up on the mud, you can build solid knowledge like the houses in Venice.
Definitely. But that's how the science works, definitely. Yeah, we have one question. Yeah.
I would like to relate my question to the last slide, that had many futures, and
This one.
to all of us, this question, many futures. So, and also to his last comment on what is the base of knowledge. So, and also to Paul Virilio that you mentioned already, and his book Pure Ore, I think you know about that book from Paul Virilio.
Paul Virilio?
Yeah. Updated version of Pure Ore. In the introduction, he's saying that it's 2007, and that it's very difficult to imagine the future, and that history was never more present than at that 2007 moment. I think somehow I feel the same that introduction is valid also for this moment. So for me, it's always, and also I would like all of us to think about these questions in future days. How are we going to imagine these many futures? From scratch? Or based on some, I don't know, like mad knowledge or nothing? That would be, I mean, for me, it would be very curious today to see some kind of work that is completely fictional, like there is nothing behind. It's so difficult all the time. And yeah, maybe recently I was in Stellan Kubrick Archive in London, and I was looking at his research for films, and he did like really crazy, research and thinking on for his movies. He was always do something different, and he was even accused him to provoke violence with his films and with his work. But at the end, when you read all the documents and you look at it, his intention was completely different, to imagine something completely different that doesn't exist at all. So this is my, but not only for you, but how.
Yeah, if somebody wants to say something on that, how can we imagine something that didn't pre-exist? That's a tough philosophical question, and I think that a lot of job has been done in philosophy. I don't know if that was in vain, but you can think of French tradition, the German tradition, Heidegger, who tried to introduce a historicity of the being and then an event, and also Deleuze, who basically, showed that through repetition something new happens, but we can never repeat anything the same matter. So there are different answers to this, but what my take is here, I don't think that we can reject the past. I completely agree with the acceptance of the historicity of the moment. When we talk about the future, we always talk about the present in a way, and the past. So first of all, we have to face this. But what I find interesting in this element of futurability, and I would say that Giorgio Agamben is at stake here. And you know Giorgio Agamben, he's your fellow at UAF, he's been your fellow at UAF. And I wanted to add his ideas to this presentation, but I thought it would be too much. So Giorgio Agamben speculated on the potentialities a lot, and on the moment of impotentiality as well. So what is this, and what it has to do with the things I was trying to present? He takes from Aristotle, the line from Aristotle, where Aristotle thinks of potential, of human potential, so having some possibilities. Dynamis and energeia, the classical philosophical problem, that our potential is actualized, the possibilities are fulfilled. But Aristotle at a certain point says, every potentiality is always an impotentiality, which means that, the classical case presented by Melville in his writings on Scrivener is that I can reject of actualizing some potential, and this rejection is a third option. It's neither a non-existent potentiality, neither an actualized potentiality. So the rejection, according to Agamben, who brings further this Aristotelian insight, is a way of growing your potential. So basically, the element of negativity, of rejecting the existent possibilities, Or if you want, you know, in the possibility we have this interplay between past and future. So basically, with the gesture of rejection, of suspending our potential, we are growing our potentiality. So we're opening up for something that was not present. So if we think of possibilities within the potential as something inherited from the past, without a certain gesture of negativity, without rejecting and suspending your potential through impotentiality, I would say there is no such thing as something new in the future. So you need, basically it's a rejection of the present which is at stake in order to open of the future, you know, to be open to the future. So I think this element of futurability has a lot to do with the gesture of negation, which creates the third option, you know, which allows you to grow into something that was neither given nor not given, you know. That's kind of a paradox, you know. It's a triangle which puts in perspective differently the element of time. It's just no. I think it's a long talk, but my preliminary proposal would be this. Yes, please.
I'm always interested in this interspecies area that we are all investigating in different ways, is when it comes to this idea of, you know, finding out what the swamp's plan is, for example, or even this idea of finding the agency of other species or other beings, you know, both through scientific methods, understanding, you know, plants and insects, and I was really interested in your one point in your presentation when you started to speak of operational tools. So you were talking about imaginary tools, but my hope, it's more a hope than a question, is that maybe we can share some of these ideas, because it's always a point where I struggle with a lot of projects trying to deal with interspecies when it comes to this idea of us taking or trying to understand and stage the agency of a swamp or a plant or an animal. And I think it also has a lot to do with media, so I'm very excited there are films happening here, because I'm relating it to, maybe particularly to this idea of deceleration, and how can we, you know, even understand how we could have a vegetative rhythm, you know, or like the type of time scale that a swamp is living in. And yeah, I think, for example, in my experience, tools like architectural or spatial representation of phenomena, of natural phenomena, are always somehow lacking when it comes to representing this sort of temporality or indeterminacy. And so, yeah, I'm very excited to hear and see the projects from people here that deal with this idea of how do we share or embody or amplify, you know, the rhythm of another species. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I'm not a practitioner, so I don't create tools. I'm rather inspired by artists who do this, you know, so mine would be only a provisional answer, but I think philosophically there is one point which I didn't you know, pick up on. It was the problem of incompatibility, of incommensurability, which brings us back to Uxku, for example, and the problem of Umwelt, you know, that basically we cannot share the same world with the swamp. And I think it would be wise to accept that we cannot share a perceptual world with the swamp. There are no way to perceive the world the same way as mushrooms or plants do. You know? But nevertheless, having said that, and having admitted, you know, that we have different tools to approach, I think that experimenting and also thematizing the different tools, which are not compatible with ours, introduce shifts in our understanding. So basically, I think that was one of the goals of the last chapter of Swamp Radio, where the sonic experiences were meant to be an altering, factors of our understanding and of our perception. So basically, I think interspecies dialogue is not possible without accepting that we have to change ourselves. It starts from, correcting our own tools, in a way. Yes, we will not reach, that dimension of being in harmony with the swamp. And I don't think we have to be that naive. It's not about the harmony. It's about the multi-perspective of takes and of future abilities, which always put you in proximity with what is happening over there. But it's already important that you thematize it and you basically transform the representation of the swamp, saying that is not a horrific place anymore. It's not a nightmare dream. You don't have to train it. So you have to learn from it. Yeah. So while learning, basically you do your research on the tools that are present there. And maybe you create your own tools.